They didn't call it kidnapping. They called it population improvement. In Australia, between 1905 and the late 1960s, governments decided a population problem could be solved by removing children, not criminals, not orphans, children with living parents. Under laws like the Aborigines Protection Act, state officials were legally appointed as guardians of Indigenous children, overriding parental authority completely. A white official could decide, on sight, that a child no longer belonged to their family. No warrants, no hearings, no explanation required. Internal government documents spelled out the objective clearly: merge them into the general population, absorb the lighter-skinned children, eliminate Aboriginality within generations. This was not hidden language. It was official policy. Children were classified by skin tone. Charts ranked them by how easily they could be trained out of their identity. The darker the child, the more likely they were sent to labor camps. The lighter the child, the more likely they were removed permanently. Officials called it protection, but the files called it something else: biological absorption. Agents traveled with police. Sometimes they came while parents were at work, sometimes during church, sometimes while mothers slept. Children were lifted into trucks as parents screamed. Some mothers ran for miles after vehicles until they collapsed. Officials recorded the removals as routine transfers. No emergency, no urgency, just a task completed. The first thing taken wasn't the child, it was the name. Upon arrival at missions and institutions, children were renamed. Birth names were crossed out. Christian names were assigned. Hair was shaved. Traditional clothing was burned. Speaking native languages brought punishment: beatings, isolation, food deprivation. Many children were told their parents had abandoned them. Others were told their families were dead. Some were used as unpaid labor by age 7. Girls trained as domestic servants. Boys sent to farms. Education stopped early. Obedience was prioritized. Records later revealed children were intentionally placed far from their home regions, sometimes thousands of kilometers away, so escape was impossible. Siblings were separated deliberately. Attachment was considered dangerous. Physical abuse was widespread. Sexual abuse was documented in government inquiries decades later. Complaints were ignored or buried. Letters written by children were intercepted and destroyed. Parents who traveled to retrieve their children were turned away or arrested for trespassing. Some children tried to run. Most were caught. Punishment followed. By official estimates, over 50,000 children were removed. Unofficial numbers suggest far more. Many never saw their families again. The state recorded success. What happened next wasn't repair. It was containment. After the removals slowed, governments shifted from action to management. Survivors who tried to reunite with family were sent into archives. Files were locked under privacy. Names were misspelled on purpose. Birthplaces were altered. Some records listed parents as unknown even when officials had written their names decades earlier. People searched for years and found nothing. When class action lawsuits were attempted, most failed. Courts ruled the removals had been legal at the time. Officials said they were following policy. Departments said responsibility no longer existed. No precedent was set. Many removed children grew up without identity documents linking them to land or kin. Without that proof, they couldn't claim community membership. Without membership, they couldn't access cultural or legal protections. That exclusion carried forward. Statistically, survivors of the removals and their children showed higher incarceration rates, higher child removal rates, higher suicide rates. The system began removing the next generation, citing unstable homes. Homes made unstable by the first removals. The loop closed. By the time the 2008 apology was delivered, most architects of the policy were dead. No trials followed. No reparations system was created nationwide. Counseling services were underfunded and temporary. The apology acknowledged harm. It changed nothing structurally. The population goal had already been met. Fewer language speakers, fragmented families, diluted land claims. The files were archived. The policy was renamed history. And the children, now adults, were left with gaps where entire lives should have been. After the removals ended, control did not disappear. It shifted into records, procedures, and long-term administration. Governments retained custody of child files and restricted access under privacy and archival laws. Names were misspelled or anglicized. Parents were listed as unknown despite existing documentation. Birthplaces were altered or reduced to vague regions. Because Indigenous identity, land rights, and community membership depend on lineage proof, these gaps still block legal recognition today. People are alive, but administratively disconnected, unable to access land claims, community governance, or compensation because the paperwork no longer supports their existence. Child removal did not stop. It changed form. Indigenous children continue to be removed at disproportionately high rates under modern welfare systems, justified by neglect, unstable housing, or family dysfunction. Government inquiries repeatedly link these conditions to intergenerational trauma caused by earlier removals. The system now intervenes because of the instability it created, using the damage as evidence that further intervention is necessary. The loop established decades ago remains active under neutral language and updated policy. As institutional removals declined, incarceration increased. Descendants of removed children are overrepresented in juvenile detention and adult prisons. Longitudinal studies connect early family separation to disrupted education, poverty, and continuous contact with state authorities. Missions and training homes closed, prisons and welfare systems absorbed the same populations. Control continued without using the original terms. Cultural loss is irreversible. Languages that lost child speakers during the removal period did not recover. Revival efforts rely on written fragments rather than living transmission, producing reconstruction instead of restoration. Knowledge tied to childhood learning disappeared with the generations that were taken. The demographic and cultural objectives of assimilation policies were permanently achieved. Formal apologies acknowledged harm without structural consequence. No nationwide reparations framework was created. No prosecutions followed. No legal precedent was set. Courts continue to rule that removals carried out under historical law were legal at the time. Records remain sealed. Liability remains undefined. Responsibility is dispersed across defunct departments. In the present day, the outcomes remain measurable. Fragmented families, unresolved identity and land claims, continued child removal, and disproportionate incarceration. The policy ended. The administrative architecture remained. History closed the file. The mechanisms continued operating inside the damage.